Some stories find us when we least expect them. They arrive not with fanfare, but quietly, like a letter from an old friend or a photograph slipping out of a book we haven't opened in years. This is a story about second chances, about the kind of love that doesn't ask permission and doesn't keep score. It's about a woman who thought her best days were behind her, and a creature who had every reason to give up but didn't. If you've ever lost someone you loved, you'll recognize Margaret. If you've ever wondered whether you still had something left to give, you'll understand her hesitation on that frozen road. And if you've ever been surprised by grace showing up exactly when you'd stopped looking for it, well, this story is for you. It happened in Montana, on the coldest night of the year. The windshield wipers were losing. Margaret Whitman gripped the steering wheel of her old Buick, knuckles white against the leather. County Road 7 had disappeared under a wall of white. The headlights cut maybe 10 feet into the blizzard before the snow swallowed them whole. Harold's AM station crackled static through the speakers. She hadn't changed it since October. Couldn't bring herself to touch the dial. Something moved in the road ahead. Margaret's foot hovered over the brake. A coyote, maybe. They wandered down from the hills in weather like this, desperate and half-frozen. But this shape was too small, too still. It wasn't running. The thing just stood there in the wash of her headlights, shaking so hard she could see the tremors from 50 feet away. A dark smudge against endless white. Margaret slowed the car. Her breath fogged the inside of the windshield. Keep driving, she told herself. You're 10 minutes from home. The roads are getting worse. You're 72 years old, and nobody's waiting up for you anymore. The shape took one step toward her car. Then it collapsed. Margaret sat frozen. The engine idled. The wipers scraped uselessly against the glass. 3 seconds, 5. She thought about Harold, 6 months gone now. Heart attack at the breakfast table. Between the first cup of coffee and the second. 48 years of marriage ended before she could say goodbye. She hadn't stopped for anything since the funeral. Not for the casseroles the neighbors left on the porch. Not for the phone calls she let go to voicemail. Not for the grief counselor's card still bent and unopened in her purse. But something about that shape in the snow, the way it had stepped toward her headlights instead of away, like it was asking for something it no longer expected to receive. Margaret pulled to the shoulder. She cut the engine. The sudden silence pressed against her ears like cotton. Wind rocked the car on its springs. She was already reaching for her coat when she saw it clearly for the first time. A dog, a puppy, really, German Shepherd, maybe 8 months old, lying motionless in the snow where it had fallen, and around its neck, glinting dull under the headlights, a chain, rusted, frozen into the fur. Margaret's hand stopped on the door handle. She knew what that chain meant. She'd been a teacher for 35 years. 3rd grade. You learn to recognize the signs, the flinch, the silence, the marks that weren't accidents. The puppy lifted its head, just barely. Its eyes found Margaret through the windshield, not begging, not anymore, just looking. One last time, those eyes seemed to say, I had to try one last time. Margaret opened the door. The wind hit her like a slap. 20 below, maybe worse with the chill. She didn't feel it. She was already walking toward the shape in the snow. If this story has touched something in you, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. They say a story shared is a story that lives on, and I believe that's true. The house was waiting for her when she got back. It always waited now, silent, patient, full of things that belonged to a man who wasn't coming home. Margaret carried the puppy inside. Still wrapped in her wool coat, The dog weighed almost nothing, bones and wet fur, and a heartbeat she could feel against her chest. Fast and fragile as a sparrow's. She laid the bundle on the kitchen floor, near the radiator. The puppy didn't move, didn't open its eyes, just breathed in short, shallow pulls. Margaret stood there, dripping snow onto the linoleum. The grandfather clock in the living room struck 11. She'd wound it last Sunday. Same time Harold always had. Same ritual, different hands. His lazy boy sat in the corner by the window. The leather had worn smooth on the left armrest where his hand used to rest during the evening news. She hadn't sat in it since October. Couldn't. His reading glasses were still on the TV guide. October 14th. She'd meant to move them, kept forgetting, kept not forgetting. 2 coffee mugs on the counter by the sink. She washed them both every morning, used one. The phone would ring on Sunday at 4. Thomas, calling from Seattle. 8 minutes exactly, every week. How are you, Mom? I'm fine, honey. Good, good. Talk next week. Click. Margaret looked down at the puppy. The chain around its neck was crusted with ice and something darker underneath. Dried blood, maybe. Old blood. The lynx had rubbed the fur away in a raw ring. She went to the garage, found Harold's wire cutters in the toolbox where he'd always kept them. The metal was cold in her hands. Back in the kitchen, she knelt on the floor. Her knees protested 72 years of protest built up in those joints, but she knelt anyway. The puppy's eyes opened, brown, flecked with gold, watching her. Margaret reached towards the chain. The dog flinched, a full-body shudder, pressing itself against the cabinet behind it. A sound came from its throat, not a growl, not a whimper, something in between. Margaret pulled her hand back. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I won't touch, not yet." The words hung in the kitchen. First words she'd spoken aloud in 3 days. The puppy was still watching her. And Margaret realized, with a cold clarity, that she recognized that look. She'd seen it before, years ago. A boy named Danny Wilcox, 3rd grade, 1987. Same eyes, same silence, same waiting for the next hurt to come. Margaret pushed herself up from the floor. Her knees cracked. The cold from the linoleum had seeped through her house dress, numbing her legs. The puppy hadn't moved, still pressed against the cabinet, watching. She set the wire cutters on the counter. Not yet, the dog wasn't ready. Margaret went to the sink, filled a bowl with water, set it on the floor 3 feet from the puppy. The puppy's nose twitched, its eyes tracked the bowl, but it didn't move toward it. Waiting, testing. Margaret stepped back, leaned against the counter, crossed her arms. "Go on," she said quietly. "It's just water." A minute passed. The clock ticked. The radiator hummed. The puppy uncurled itself. Slow, careful. Belly low to the ground, ready to bolt. It stretched its neck toward the bowl, keeping its eyes on Margaret the whole time. The first lap was tentative, the second faster. By the third, the dog was drinking in desperate gulps, water splashing onto the floor. Margaret watched the ribs heave with each breath. She could count them through the matted fur, every single one, when the bowl was empty. The puppy looked up, water dripped from its muzzle. Margaret refilled the bowl, set it down again, this time. The dog drank without hesitation. While it drank, Margaret studied the injuries she could see. The chain still needed to come off. The links were rusted, crusted with dried blood where they'd rubbed the skin raw. But there was more. The puppy's right front leg bent wrong at the ankle. An old break, healed crooked. Someone hadn't bothered with a vet. Hand on the good ear, the one that wasn't torn, she saw them now in the kitchen light. Circles, small, round, evenly spaced. 4 of them in a row along the edge of the ear. Burns. Margaret's hands gripped the counter edge behind her. She knew those marks. Every teacher learned to recognize them eventually, the ones who paid attention. Anyway, cigarette burns, deliberate, patterned. Not an accident. Never an accident. Her jaw tightened until her teeth ached. The puppy finished drinking, sat back, looked at her again with those gold-flecked eyes. Margaret thought about the shelter in Millbrook. 20 miles, closed at night. This dog wouldn't survive the drive, not in this condition. She thought about the note taped to the shelter door last month when she dropped off a stray cat, full capacity. No intake until further notice. She thought about her empty house, the silence, the 2 coffee mugs. "I'm not keeping you," she said aloud. The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Just for tonight, until the storm passes." The puppy tilted its head. Margaret went to the refrigerator. Eggs, butter, half a block of cheddar going hard at the edges. She hadn't cooked a real meal in weeks. She cracked 3 eggs into the pan on the stove, scrambled them soft, the way Harold used to like. Added a little butter. Let them cool on a plate. The smell filled the kitchen, warm, familiar, a smell from another life. She set the plate on the floor. The puppy stood up, limped forward on that crooked leg, sniffed the eggs once. Then it ate like it was dying, which, Margaret realized, it probably had been. The food was gone in 30 seconds. The dog licked the plate clean, pushing it across the floor. Margaret made more. The second helping disappeared just as fast. The third. The puppy ate slower. Finally full. Finally stopping. It lay down beside the empty plate. Its eyes were already closing, now. While the dog was calm. While it trusted her enough to close its eyes. Margaret picked up the wire cutters, knelt again, slower this time. Her knees knew the complaint by heart. The puppy's eyes opened, watched, but didn't flinch. Margaret worked the cutters under the first link. The rust crumbled, the metal was thin, weakened by weather and neglect. Snip. The chain fell away in 2 pieces, clattering on the linoleum. The puppy flinched at the sound, then went still. Its neck was bare now, raw and red where the chain had been, but bare. Margaret gathered the chain, threw it in the garbage, washed her hands twice. When she turned back, the puppy was watching her again, something different in its eyes now. Not trust, not yet, but something close to curiosity. Margaret went to the hallway closet, pulled out Harold's old flannel shirts, the red plaid ones he'd worn on fishing trips up to Flathead Lake. They still smelled faintly of him, pine and tobacco, and the aftershave he'd used for 40 years. She made a bed from them on the kitchen floor, near the warmth of the radiator. The puppy watched her do it, then, slowly, it crawled onto the flannel, circled once, lay down. Its tail moved, just once, just barely. Margaret stood over the little bed. The dog's eyes were closed now, its breathing had slowed. The desperate edge was gone. She should go to her own bed. This was foolish, setting up with a stray dog like a new mother with a colicky baby. But she pulled a chair from the table, sat down, watched the fire flicker behind the radiator grate. The grandfather clock struck midnight. Margaret listened to the storm outside and the soft breathing of the dog at her feet. She realized, with something like surprise, that she wasn't counting the hours until morning, wasn't dreading the silence of another empty day. She was just sitting, present, here, sometime near 2 in the morning. Without meaning to, she fell asleep in the kitchen chair. When she woke, gray dawn light was seeping through the windows. The storm had passed. The world outside was white and still. The puppy was awake, sitting at her feet, watching her. And for the first time since Harold's funeral, Margaret Whitman woke up with something to do. She was halfway through making coffee when she heard it. An engine in the driveway. Diesel, loud, getting closer. The puppy's ears flattened against its skull. It began to shake. The engine sound grew louder, then stopped. Margaret stood frozen by the coffee maker. The puppy had wedged itself under the kitchen table. Trembling, a car door slammed, footsteps on the porch, heavy boots crunching through ice. Then a voice, muffled through the door. "Mrs. Whitman, you in there? It's Carl Henderson from down the road." Margaret let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She opened the door. Carl stood on the porch, ruddy-faced from the cold, his John Deere cap dusted with snow. "Just checking on folks after the storm," he said. "Power's out on Miller Road. Wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine, Carl, thank you." He nodded, already turning to leave, then stopped, looked past her into the kitchen. "That a dog under your table, stray? Found her on the road last night." Carl squinted. "Looks rough. You taking her to Doc Coleman?" "Soon as I can get the car out. Roads are clearing. Should be passable by noon." He tipped his cap. "You need anything, you call." Margaret watched his truck back down the driveway. Under the table, the puppy was still shaking. Dr. Rachel Coleman's clinic sat at the edge of town. A converted farmhouse with a hand-painted sign, Coleman Veterinary Services. Large and small animals since 1989. Margaret carried the puppy inside, wrapped in one of Harold's flannel shirts. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and cedar shavings. A cat yowled somewhere in the back. Rachel Coleman came out herself, silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Hands that had touched 10,000 animals over 30 years. Maggie Whitman. She looked at the bundle in Margaret's arms. "What have we got here?" "Found her last night. On County Road 7. Rachel took the puppy gently. "Let's have a look." In the exam room, under fluorescent lights, the injuries looked worse than they had in Margaret's kitchen. The matted fur, the raw skin where the chain had been, the crooked leg. Rachel worked in silence, checking eyes, ears, teeth, palpating the belly, flexing each joint. Margaret sat in the plastic chair against the wall, coat still buttoned. "Malnutrition," Rachel said finally. "Severe, at least 2 weeks without proper food. Probably longer." She ran her fingers along the crooked front leg. "This fracture is old. Months old. Healed without any treatment." "I saw." Rachel lifted the puppy's ear, examined the circular marks along the edge. She was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret." Her voice had changed. "These burns are deliberate. I know what they are." Rachel set down the puppy's ear, removed her glasses, met Margaret's eyes. "I've been doing this 30 years. I know the difference between accidents and patterns. Whoever had this dog," she stopped, chose her words carefully, "they enjoyed causing pain." The words hung in the sterile air. "Can she recover?" Margaret asked. "Physically, yes. With proper food and care, her body will heal. The leg will always be a little crooked, but it won't slow her down much." She looked at the puppy, who was pressed against the far corner of the exam table, watching them both. "The rest depends on who she's with. Back home, proper bowls now, bought at the hardware store. A real dog bed from the back of Harold's closet, the one their old retriever Sam used to sleep in. Years ago, the puppy followed Margaret from room to room, kitchen to living room to kitchen again. Always 3 feet behind, never closer, watching, waiting, still expecting the hurt. 3 days passed. The puppy ate, gained weight. The raw skin around her neck began to heal. The trembling stopped. Mostly. On the 3rd afternoon, Margaret sat in Harold's chair. She hadn't planned to. Her legs just carried her there. The leather was cold. It didn't hold his shape anymore. Someone had been sitting in it. Her. The puppy stood in the doorway, watching. An hour passed. The grandfather clock marked it with steady ticks. The radiator hummed. Light shifted across the floor as the sun moved behind clouds. The puppy took a step, then another, across the living room. Slow and careful. Belly low. She stopped at Margaret's feet, looked up. Then so slowly it barely seemed like movement rested her chin on Margaret's knee. Margaret's hand found the dog's head. The fur was softer now. Clean from the bath yesterday. Warm. "Hope," Margaret whispered. "That's your name now." The tail moved, once, barely, but it moved. The knock came 2 days later. 3 hard pounds on the front door. Hope's head snapped up from her bed by the fireplace. Her ears flattened. Margaret set down her coffee, walked to the door. A man stood on her porch, mid-40s, unshaven. Flannel jacket over a stained t-shirt. The smell hit her through the storm door. Stale beer. Cigarettes. Something sour underneath. His pickup truck idled in the driveway. Rust eating through the wheel wells. Exhaust clouding the cold air. "That's my dog." No greeting. No question. Margaret's hand tightened on the doorframe. "Excuse me, German Shepherd." "Puppy. Someone saw you pick her up on County Road 7. His eyes moved past her, scanning the house. "She's mine." She was in the middle of the road, in a blizzard, with a chain frozen to her neck. The man shrugged. "She ran off. I was looking for her." "Looking for her? At night? In a blizzard and 20 below weather? I don't like what you're implying, lady." "I'm not implying anything. I'm saying it straight." Behind her. Hope made a sound. Not a growl. She wasn't brave enough for that yet. A whimper, small and broken. The man heard it. His lips curved. "See? She knows who her owner is." Margaret didn't move from the doorway. That's not recognition. That's what fear sounds like. The man's smile disappeared. He stepped forward. Margaret didn't step back. "I'm trying to be civil here. That dog is my property. I paid $200 for her. I got the receipt." "A receipt doesn't give you the right to what, discipline my own animal." His voice dropped, almost friendly, almost reasonable. "She's high-strung, needs a firm hand. You know how shepherds are." Margaret thought of Danny Wilcox's father. Same voice, same reasonableness, same lie underneath. "You're not taking her." The friendliness vanished from his face. "I'll be back," he said, "with the sheriff. We'll see what he thinks about an old lady stealing people's property." He turned, walked to his truck. The broken muffler roared as he backed down the driveway. Margaret closed the door. Locked it. Her hands were shaking. Hope crawled out from under the kitchen table, pressed against Margaret's legs. Margaret reached down, this time. Hope didn't flinch. But outside, somewhere on the county road, that diesel engine was still rumbling, and Margaret realized she didn't even know the man's name. Sheriff Frank Dawson's cruiser pulled into the driveway the next morning. Margaret watched from the kitchen window. Hope pressed against her leg, ears flat, body rigid. Frank climbed out slowly. He was 63. Silver mustache gone white at the edges, the same Rotary Club pin on his jacket he'd worn for 20 years. He and Harold used to play poker on Thursday nights. He knocked twice, polite, almost apologetic. Margaret opened the door. "Maggie," he took off his hat. "Mind if I come in?" She led him to the kitchen table, put on coffee. The motions were automatic muscle memory from decades of hospitality. Cups, saucers. The sugar bowl Harold had picked up at a flea market in Billings. Frank sat heavily in the chair across from her. His eyes found Hope, still pressed against Margaret's legs. "That the dog? That's her." He nodded slowly, didn't reach toward the animal, didn't make any sudden moves. "Travis Murdoch filed a complaint this morning." Margaret's hands stopped on the coffee pot. "Travis Murdoch lives out on Route 9, past the old grain elevator." Frank turned his hat in his hands. "Says you took his dog. I found an animal dying in a blizzard, chain frozen to its neck, cigarette burns on its ears." Frank didn't argue, didn't contradict, just sat there, looking tired. "Maggie, I believe you. Looking at that dog right now, I can see something bad happened to her, but believing and proving are different things in a courtroom." Margaret poured the coffee, set a cup in front of him. Her hands were steady, but her pulse beat hard in her throat. "What are you telling me?" "Frank, in Montana, dogs are property, same as a car or a tractor." He wrapped his hands around the cup but didn't drink. "If Murdoch can prove ownership receipt, vet records, anything with his name on it, the law says she's his. And the abuse, without a formal complaint on file before this, it's your word against his." He met her eyes. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's how the system works." The clock ticked in the living room. Hope's breathing was shallow and fast against Margaret's ankle. "So, a man can torture an animal," Margaret said slowly. "And as long as nobody reported it at the time, he gets to keep doing it." Frank didn't answer. The silence said enough. He stood, left his coffee untouched. "Get documentation, take pictures of every injury, get a written statement from Dr. Coleman, anything that makes this ugly enough that a commissioner won't want his name on it. And if I do that, then we put it in front of Harding. Let him decide." Frank put his hat back on. "I'm sorry. Maggie, I wish the law was different." He stopped at the door, turned back. "Harold would have done the same thing. You know, fought it." Margaret looked at the empty chair across the table, the one Harold used to sit in for breakfast. "Harold's not here." "No." Frank's voice was quiet. "But you are—" The drive back to Dr. Coleman's clinic felt longer this time. Hope sat in the passenger seat, still nervous in the car, but no longer shaking. Margaret found Rachel in the back, examining a tabby cat with a torn ear. "I need everything in writing," Margaret said. "Every injury, every mark, photographs, dates, your professional opinion on how they happened." Rachel set down the cat, looked at Margaret over her reading glasses. "He came for her." "He did." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Give me an hour." Margaret waited in the lobby, counted the tiles on the floor, watched the clock on the wall mark the minutes. When Rachel came out, she handed Margaret a manila folder, 6 pages, photographs paperclipped to the back. "Malnutrition consistent with extended starvation," Rachel said. "Healed fracture with no evidence of veterinary care. Multiple burn marks consistent with deliberate application of a lit cigarette. She met Margaret's eyes. "I've been doing this 30 years. I'll say it under oath if I have to." Margaret took the folder. It felt heavier than paper should. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Rachel pulled off her glasses. "Murdoch's got friends. His cousin's a lawyer up in Billings, and I heard he had a girlfriend who left town suddenly about 6 months back. Nobody knows why she ran." She paused. "You're picking a fight with a mean dog, Margaret." From the clinic, Margaret drove to County Road 7. The snow had melted enough to show the ditches along the shoulder. She parked where she'd found Hope, got out, walked the edge of the road. The chains were still there, 3 of them, rusted, tangled in the dead grass. An old wire dog crate sat half buried in the snow, too small for any dog over 3 months. Crushed beer cans scattered around it. Margaret photographed everything. Her hands were cold, fingers clumsy on the phone camera Thomas had made her buy last Christmas. She found more as she walked. A leather collar, cracked and stiff, the buckle bent out of shape, a length of rope with dark stains she didn't want to think about. A pattern, evidence of something done more than once. At the hardware store in town, she bought new batteries for the camera. Frank Bellamy was behind the counter 67. Owned the place for 40 years. Knew everyone within 50 miles. Heard about your situation. "Mrs. Whitman." He rang up the batteries slowly. "That Murdoch fella's been in here before." Margaret looked up. "Has he bought chains, cheap collars, always complained his dogs were useless?" Frank made a face. Said he was training them, didn't like the way he said it. "Would you put that in writing?" Frank paused. His hands stopped on the register. "You're really going to fight this?" "I am." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, I'll write it down. Sunday morning." Margaret almost didn't go to church. She stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, half-dressed, looking at the gray circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept well since Murdoch's visit. Every engine sound on the road made her tense. But she went. Same pew she'd sat in for 30 years. Same view of the stained glass window with the shepherd and his flock. The service passed in a blur, scripture, hymns. Pastor Reynolds' voice rising and falling. Then came the prayer requests. Eleanor Patterson stood up. 78 years old, widowed twice, ran the church bake sale like a military operation. "I'd like us to pray for Margaret Whitman." Every head turned, Margaret's face flushed hot. She's fighting to protect a helpless creature from a man who doesn't deserve to own a houseplant, let alone a dog. Eleanor's voice was clear and steady. "Some of you know about it. Some of you have opinions." She paused, looked around the room. "I'll say this once. When a woman stands up for something that can't stand up for itself, you don't sit on your hands and watch." She sat down. The church was silent. Pastor Reynolds cleared his throat. Moved on to the closing hymn. After the service, people found Margaret in the parking lot. Carl Henderson. "My boy saw Murdoch throw a bottle at a stray last month. I'll put it in writing." The gas station attendant's wife. "He kicked a dog in our lot last summer. My husband saw the whole thing." An envelope pressed into her hand by a woman she barely knew. $50 inside. A note. "For legal fees or whatever you need." But not everyone. The Hendersons' neighbors walked past without speaking. The Murdochs had a lot of cousins in this county. She heard whispers as she unlocked her car. Should mind her own business. Just a dog, after all. What if everyone just took animals they thought were mistreated? There's a process. Margaret's hands tightened on the keys. Eleanor appeared at her elbow. "Ignore them. hard to ignore. Doesn't mean you have to listen. Eleanor squeezed her arm. You'll lose some people over this. The ones who don't want trouble. The ones who think getting along matters more than doing right. Margaret looked back at the church. At the people still clustered on the steps. Some watching her. Some carefully looking away. Worth it? Eleanor asked. Margaret thought about Hope, about the way the dog's tail had wagged yesterday when Margaret came home from the store. About the first time she'd played chased a sock across the living room. Clumsy and joyful. Ask me when it's over. The letter came on Tuesday. Deputy Chase Miller delivered it. Young, apologetic. Clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Ma'am, I just want you to know I'm just doing my job. Margaret took the envelope. I know. She read it at the kitchen table. Hope lay at her feet. Chin on paws. Legal letterhead. Larry Murdoch, attorney at law. Billings. Return the animal within 48 hours or face charges of theft and property destruction. My client is prepared to pursue maximum penalties under Montana law. Margaret's coffee went cold beside her. The grandfather clock chimed in the living room. Once, twice, she looked at Hope. The dog was watching her, alert, waiting, yesterday. Hope had eaten her whole breakfast without flinching when Margaret set down the bowl. This morning, she'd slept past dawn for the first time, really slept. Not the half-awake vigilance of the first week. She was healing. Margaret folded the letter. Put it in the drawer with the unpaid bills and the grocery coupon she never remembered to use. She picked up the phone. Dialed the number Dr. Coleman's husband had given her. A woman answered. Young voice, professional. Abigail Cross, family law. My name is Margaret Whitman. I have a situation involving an animal. Dr. Coleman's husband called me. I've been expecting to hear from you. I need to know if I have a case. A pause, papers rustling. I've seen cases like this before, Mrs. Whitman. They're not easy, but they're not impossible either. I'm 72 years old. I live on a teacher's pension. I can't afford. First consultation is free. And if we move forward, Eleanor Patterson has already called about organizing a fundraiser through the church. Abigail paused. You've got more people behind you than you know. Margaret closed her eyes. When do we start? That night. Margaret sat by the fireplace. Hope lay on her bed. Eyes half closed in the warmth. The manila folder from Dr. Coleman sat on the coffee table. The photographs, the affidavits, the lawyer's phone number on a scrap of paper, everything she needed to fight. Margaret looked at Harold's photo on the mantel, tried to remember what he would say. You're stubborn as a mule, Maggie. Yes, she was. Hope's ears twitched. She lifted her head, looked toward the window, outside, somewhere on the county road. An engine rumbled past, diesel, loud, familiar. The sound faded into the distance, but Hope was still staring at the window. And Margaret realized Travis Murdoch knew where she lived, knew she was alone, knew she wasn't backing down. The reporter from the Gazette had called that afternoon, asking for an interview. Margaret had declined, but word was spreading now. The story was getting bigger. The hearing was 2 weeks away. A lot could happen in 2 weeks. Margaret woke at 4 a.m. The bedroom was dark. Cold seeped through the window where the seal had worn thin years ago. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks she'd memorized over 48 years in this bed. Today was the hearing. Hope was already awake, standing in the bedroom doorway, watching her. The dog hadn't slept well either. Margaret had heard her pacing in the night, claws clicking on the hardwood. She pushed back the covers. Her feet found the cold floor. In the kitchen, she went through the motions. Coffee, toast she didn't eat. Hope's breakfast in the metal bowl. The dog sniffed the food, looked up at Margaret, didn't eat. "I know," Margaret said quietly. "I'm not hungry either." She showered, dressed carefully. The navy blue dress from the back of her closet, the one she'd worn to Harold's funeral. Pearl earrings he'd given her on their 30th anniversary. Practical shoes, because the county building had marble floors and she didn't trust her balance anymore. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. An old woman looked back. Gray hair pinned up, dark circles under her eyes. Her mother's jaw. Her grandmother's stubborn mouth. She went back to the living room, knelt beside Hope, ignoring the protest in her knees. "Whatever happens today," she said, "you know you're loved now. That's more than you had before." Hope's tail moved once. She licked Margaret's hand. The crunch of tires on gravel. Eleanor's Oldsmobile pulling into the driveway. Margaret stood, gathered her folder of evidence, took one last look around the house. Harold's photo on the mantel, the grandfather clock ticking steady, the empty chair. She walked out the door. The county building was a 1950s brick box on Main Street. American flag whipping in the February wind. Ice patches on the steps that nobody had salted. Eleanor took Margaret's arm going up. Neither of them mentioned it. Inside, the hallway smelled of floor wax and old radiators. Their footsteps echoed off the marble. Commissioner Harding's meeting room was at the end of the hall. Double doors, dark wood, brass handles worn smooth by decades of hands. Margaret stopped outside, took a breath. "Ready?" Eleanor asked. "No." "Good. Means you're paying attention." They went in. The room was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, filled with faces Margaret knew. Carl Henderson near the back. Frank Bellamy from the hardware store. The gas station attendant and his wife. Dr. Coleman in the second row. Manila folder in her lap. Sheriff Dawson stood against the far wall. Arms crossed. Face unreadable. A young woman from Channel 4 sat in the corner. Notepad open. The Gazette reporter beside her. And in the front row, on the left side, Travis Murdoch. He'd cleaned up, shaved. Wore a button-down shirt Margaret suspected he'd borrowed. His cousin Larry sat beside him in a cheap suit. Briefcase open, papers spread across his lap. Travis's eyes found Margaret as she walked in. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Abigail Cross was already at the table on the right. Young, dark hair pulled back tight. Posture straight as a ruler. She stood when Margaret approached. "Mrs. Whitman, we're ready." Margaret sat. Her hands were cold. She folded them in her lap where no one could see them shake. Commissioner Harding entered through a side door, 70 years old, former Marine, face like granite weathered by decades of hard decisions. He took his seat at the raised table at the front of the room without ceremony. "This hearing will come to order." His voice filled the room without effort. "The matter before us is a property dispute regarding one German Shepherd dog, currently in the possession of Mrs. Margaret Whitman, claimed by Mr. Travis Murdoch." He looked at Larry Murdoch. "Counsel for the claimant may proceed." Larry stood, buttoned his jacket, walked to the center of the room with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "Commissioner, this is a simple matter." He held up a piece of paper. "Bill of sale from Henderson Kennels in Kalispell, dated March 15th of last year. $200. My client's name, his signature, his property." He held up another paper. Veterinary receipt from April. Basic vaccinations. Again, my client's name. He set both documents on Harding's table. The facts are clear. This dog belongs to Mr. Murdoch, Mrs. Whitman, however well-intentioned she may be, unlawfully took possession of my client's animal during the storm on January 23rd. We're asking for the immediate return of the property and consideration of theft charges. He sat down. Travis was nodding, arms crossed, looking satisfied. Harding turned to Abigail. Response. Abigail stood. She didn't button her jacket, didn't walk to the center, just spoke from where she was. Voice clear and even. Commissioner, I have a 6-page veterinary report from Dr. Rachel Coleman documenting injuries consistent with prolonged, deliberate abuse. Photographs of cigarette burns, a healed fracture that received no medical care, malnutrition indicating weeks of starvation. She opened her folder, spread the photographs across the table. I have affidavits from 5 members of this community describing incidents of animal cruelty they witnessed involving Mr. Murdoch. I have photographs of chains, a dog crate, and other items recovered from the roadside where Mrs. Whitman found this animal. She looked at Larry Murdoch. This isn't a property dispute. This is an abuse case. Larry was on his feet. Objection, circumstantial. That dog could have been injured after running away. There's no proof my client, the burns, are 4 months old. Dr. Coleman's voice cut through the room. She hadn't stood, hadn't raised her hand, just spoke. The fracture is older than that. These injuries didn't happen in the 3 days the dog was missing. Larry turned toward her. You're not under oath. I'll go under oath right now if the commissioner wants. Harding held up a hand. That's enough, both of you. A silence. Travis stood suddenly. His chair scraped against the floor. This is ridiculous. His voice was loud, too loud for the room. That old woman stole my dog. I want her arrested. I want my property back. I have rights. Sit down, Mr. Murdoch. Harding's voice was quiet. Dangerous quiet. I will not sit down. This whole thing is a setup. She doesn't have any proof. Just a bunch of busybodies who don't like me. Mr. Murdoch. Harding leaned forward. You have one chance to sit down and let your lawyer speak for you. Take it. Travis's face was red. His hands were fists at his sides. For a moment, Margaret thought he might charge towards the table. Then Larry grabbed his arm, pulled him down, whispered something sharp in his ear. Travis sat, but his eyes never left Margaret. Harding turned to her. Mrs. Whitman, would you like to speak? Margaret stood. Her legs felt unsteady. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted. I was a teacher for 35 years, 3rd grade, mostly. She paused, found her breath. You see a lot of children in 35 years. Most of them are happy, some of them aren't. The room was silent now. Even Travis had stopped moving. You learn to recognize it. The flinch when someone raises their hand, even if they're just reaching for a piece of chalk. The way they watch doors. The way they make themselves small. She looked at the photographs on Harding's table. The cigarette burns. The crooked leg. That dog didn't run away from a home. Her voice steadied. She ran away from a house where someone hurt her. Every day. She chose a blizzard over another night with him. She turned to look at Travis. Met his eyes. You don't want her back because you miss her. You want her back because she's yours. Because you don't like being told no. Travis's jaw worked. His knuckles were white on the armrest. Margaret turned back to the commissioner. I've known men like him. They always have reasons. She's difficult. She needs discipline. She made me do it. Her voice dropped. But the scars tell the truth. And so do the burns. She sat down. Eleanor took her hand under the table, held it tight. Harding was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the photographs, at the affidavits, at the bill of sale. The clock on the wall ticked, once, twice, 10 times. "I've seen combat," Harding said finally. "Spent 2 years in Vietnam. I know what people do when they think no one's watching." He looked at the photographs again. This wasn't an accident. Anyone who looks at these pictures knows that Larry stood commissioner. The law is clear about property rights. The law is also clear about animal cruelty. Harding closed the folder. "And I've got enough evidence here to warrant an investigation." He straightened the papers in front of him. "I'm ordering a 30-day hold on any transfer of the animal. During that time, Animal Control will investigate the claims of abuse. If they find cause, this becomes a criminal matter." Travis shot to his feet. "You can't. I'm not finished." Harding didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "Mr. Murdoch, if I were you, I'd spend those 30 days finding a good lawyer, a better one than your cousin." The room was silent. Travis stood frozen. His face had gone from red to white. Larry grabbed his arm, pulled him toward the door. As they passed Margaret's table, Travis stopped, leaned close. His breath smelled of coffee and something sour underneath. 30 days, he whispered. Only she could hear. "Then I'm coming for her. And for you." The door closed behind them. The room began to empty, people filing out, murmuring. Abigail was packing up her folder. Dr. Coleman nodded at Margaret from across the room. But Margaret sat still. 30 days, not a victory, a delay. And Travis Murdoch's whisper echoed in her ears, mixing with the memory of his truck rumbling past her house at night. 30 days was a long time. A lot could happen. The first week after the hearing was quiet. Too quiet. Margaret kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't, not right away. Then the whispers started. She heard them at the grocery store. 2 women in the cereal aisle, heads bent together, voices just loud enough to carry. Always was a bit odd, even before Harold passed. "My cousin says she's hoarding animals now. Crazy old widow, living alone, stealing people's dogs." Margaret's hand stopped on the box of oatmeal. Her face burned hot. She put the box back on the shelf, walked to the next aisle. The women's laughter followed her. At the pharmacy, the clerk who'd filled her prescriptions for 15 years handed over her blood pressure medication without meeting her eyes. "That'll be $12.40. No small talk. No, 'How are you doing, Mrs. Whitman?' No mention of the weather or the church potluck." Margaret paid, left, sat in her car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, going nowhere. The note appeared in her mailbox 3 days later. No envelope, just a piece of paper, folded once, troublemaker. "Mind your own business or else." Margaret stood at the end of her driveway, holding the note. The wind tugged at her coat. A truck drove past on the county road. The driver didn't wave. She put the note in her pocket, told no one. The dead bird came on a Tuesday. A crow, neck twisted, left on her front porch. She found it when she went out to get the newspaper. Margaret stared at it. The black feathers ruffled in the cold wind. One eye open, filming over. She got a shovel from the garage, buried it behind the woodpile, didn't call the sheriff. What would she say? "Someone left me a dead bird." She could already imagine the looks, the careful sympathy hiding something else. Maybe she's losing it. Maybe Harold's death broke something in her. Maybe it had. The vandalism happened on a Thursday night. Margaret was asleep when Hope started whimpering. Not barking, the dog still rarely barked, but a high, urgent sound that pulled Margaret from her dreams. She got up, pulled on her robe, walked to the living room. Hope was at the window, paws on the sill, staring into the darkness. Then Margaret heard it. An engine, driving away fast. She turned on the porch light, opened the front door. Eggs smashed across the windows, dripping yellow in the cold. The yolk was already freezing, crusting on the glass. The smell hit her immediately, sulfur and rot. And on the mailbox in red spray paint, "Dog Thief." Margaret stood on the porch in her nightgown, her bare feet on the frozen boards, the wind cutting through the thin flannel. She stood there 2 minutes, maybe 3. Her teeth chattered. She couldn't feel her toes, but she couldn't move. Then her body made the decision for her. Her legs carried her back inside, shaking so hard she had to grip the doorframe. Sheriff Dawson came in the morning, took pictures, made notes, asked questions she couldn't answer. Did you see anyone? No. Hear a voice? No. Any idea who might have done this? Margaret looked at the spray paint. The letters were crude, dripping. I have ideas. Frank closed his notebook. Without proof, there's nothing I can do. Maggie, I'm sorry. She nodded. Watched him drive away. It took her 2 hours to clean the eggs off the windows. The cold made her fingers numb within minutes. She had to go inside to warm them, then come back out, again and again. The smell got into her hair, her clothes. She threw up once in the bushes by the porch. Nothing in her stomach but bile. The spray paint wouldn't come off the mailbox. She tried soap, tried to turpentine from the garage. The red faded to pink, but the letters stayed, readable from the road. Finally, she just stood there, bucket in one hand, rag in the other, soap suds freezing on her sleeves. An old woman in a dirty housecoat, scrubbing her own mailbox at 10 in the morning. A car drove past, slowed. She saw faces in the windows, looking. Then it sped up again. She could feel their eyes, the quick glances, the way they'd talk about this later. Did you see Margaret Whitman standing in her yard like that? Something's not right with her. This was what shame felt like, not sharp, slow. The knowledge that everyone was watching, everyone was judging, and there was nothing she could do to make them see the truth. She went to the grocery store that afternoon. She needed milk, bread, dog food. The store was quiet, midweek, only a few shoppers. Margaret pushed her cart down the aisles, head down, trying not to look at anyone. In the bread aisle, she saw Helen Crawford. Helen had been her colleague for 20 years. They'd shared a classroom wall at Lincoln Elementary, eaten lunch together every Tuesday. Helen had brought a casserole to Harold's funeral. Margaret raised her hand to wave. Helen looked at her, looked away, walked to another aisle. Margaret's hand dropped. She stood in the bread aisle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The muzak played something soft and forgettable. A teenager behind her said, loud enough to hear, "That's the dog lady." My dad says she's gone crazy since her husband died. Margaret left her cart in the middle of the aisle, half full, milk warming in the basket. She walked out of the store, got in her car, drove home. She didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. They'd stopped coming months ago. She just drove, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. Empty. That night, Margaret sat in Harold's chair. Hope lay at her feet. The fire had burned down to embers. The grandfather clock struck 11. She looked around the room. the photographs, the books Harold would never finish, the reading glasses still on the TV guide, 48 years in this house, 35 years teaching. And now she was the crazy dog lady, the troublemaker, the widow who couldn't let go. She picked up the phone, started to dial Abigail's number. She would tell her it was over. She was too old, too tired. The fight wasn't worth it. She would give Hope back. Pay whatever fine they wanted. Fade into the background where old women were supposed to go. Her finger hovered over the last digit. Hope lifted her head, looked at Margaret. Those gold-flecked eyes, trusting now, in a way they hadn't been 3 weeks ago. Margaret set down the phone. She couldn't dial, couldn't make the call, but she couldn't get up either. She sat in the dark. The fire died. The house grew cold. Hope climbed onto her lap. Too big for it now, but she did it anyway, pressed her head against Margaret's shoulder. And finally, the tears came. Ugly crying, shaking sobs that hurt her chest and made her throat raw. Crying for Harold, for herself, for the life she thought she'd have and the one she'd ended up with instead. She cried until there was nothing left. Hope stayed, warm weight in her lap, heartbeat against her chest. The next morning, Margaret didn't get out of bed. The ceiling was white, cracked in 3 places near the window. She counted the cracks, lost count, started over. Hope whined at the bedroom door, needed food, needed to go outside. Margaret didn't move. An hour passed. The light shifted. The clock ticked. Then Hope pushed open the door, walked to the bed, jumped up. She stood on Margaret's chest, stared down at her face, and barked. Not a scared sound, not a whimper, a demand. Margaret looked into the dog's eyes. She thought about the night on County Road 7, the shape in the snow, the one step forward before the collapse. Hope hadn't given up then. Margaret closed her eyes, opened them. She sat up, and at that moment, someone knocked on the front door. Margaret pulled on her robe. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her. Hope followed close behind, no longer trembling, but alert. Ears forward. Another knock, softer this time. Hesitant, Margaret opened the door. A young woman stood on the porch. Early 20s, dark hair pulled back. Circles under her eyes that matched to Margaret's own. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like armor. Mrs. Whitman, her voice was thin, uncertain. I'm Megan Hollister. I saw you on Channel 4. The story about the hearing. Margaret studied her face. The nervous way she shifted her weight, the way her eyes kept darting to the road behind her, as if expecting someone to appear. You'd better come inside. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold between them. Megan hadn't touched hers. Her hands stayed wrapped around the manila folder. Her fingers were bitten to the quick, the skin around the nails red and raw. I've driven past your house 3 times this week. The words came out flat, practiced, like she'd rehearsed them on the drive over. Couldn't make myself knock. Then I saw the spray paint on your mailbox and She stopped, swallowed. I dated Travis for 8 months. I left him 6 months ago. Margaret waited, said nothing. I saw what he did to his dogs. Megan's eyes dropped to the table. Hope wasn't the first. I suspected as much. There was one before her, a mutt, brown and white. She disappeared one night. Megan's voice caught. She swallowed, continued. He said she ran off, but I found blood in the garage the next morning, on the concrete. He'd tried to clean it up, but she stopped. Her hands tightened on the folder. I knew what it meant. I knew. But I didn't do anything. Margaret looked at the young woman across from her, at the trembling hands, the bitten nails, the fear etched into every line of her body. Why are you here now? Megan opened the folder. Spread the contents across the table, photographs, text messages printed on paper, dates written in pencil in the margins. A text from Travis had to teach her a lesson. Won't make that noise again. Another new puppy's feisty. We'll see how long that lasts. Margaret's stomach turned. She didn't touch the papers. This is enough to put him away, she said quietly. Megan nodded. Didn't speak. But you don't want to testify. The young woman's shoulders curved inward, making herself small. The same posture Margaret had seen in 100 frightened children over 35 years of teaching. He said if I ever told anyone, he'd make sure nobody believed me. Her voice was barely a whisper now. He's got friends, cousins, people who owe him favors. And she stopped, pressed her palms flat against the table. I'm nobody. I work at a diner in Bozeman. I rent a room from a woman I barely know. I don't have anyone. Margaret sat with the silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Megan looked up, confusion in her eyes. I'm not going to guilt you or pressure you or make you feel worse than you already do. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. You've had enough of that from men who thought they owned you. Megan's breath caught. But I want to tell you something, a story. Will you listen? Megan nodded. 6 months ago, my husband died. 48 years we were married. And when he was gone, I wanted to disappear too. Just fade out. Let the clock run down. She looked at the window, the gray February light. Then I found that dog on the road, and I had a choice. Keep driving or stop. She turned back to Megan. I stopped. And it cost me the whispers, the spray paint on my mailbox, the people who cross the street when they see me coming. Her voice stayed steady. This wasn't self-pity, just facts. But I found something I'd lost. Purpose. Reason to get up in the morning. Something worth fighting for. Even when the fight is ugly. She didn't reach across the table, just rested her hands nearby. You have a choice too, not a fair one, not an easy one, but a choice. And whatever you decide, I'll understand. Megan was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared of what he'll do. I know. What if nobody believes me? I believe you. Dr. Coleman will believe you. Commissioner Harding isn't a fool. But what if? There's no guarantee. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. There never is. You might testify and he might walk free anyway. That's the truth. Megan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Then why should I do it? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Because you know what happens if you don't. You've been living with it for 6 months. The wondering, the guilt. Every time you see a dog on the street, every time you hear about someone like him hurting something helpless. She leaned forward slightly. You can carry that forever. Or you can set it down just once and let someone else help carry it with you. Megan stared at her. The tears had stopped. Something else was moving behind her eyes now. Something harder. Older, she looked down at the photographs on the table. The texts. The evidence of a cruelty she'd witnessed and run from. When she looked up, her jaw was set. When's the next hearing? Day after tomorrow. 3 days before the deadline. Megan gathered the papers, put them back in the folder. I'll be there. Commissioner Harding called an emergency session. The room was even more crowded than before. Word had spread. The reporter from the Gazette had brought a photographer. Channel 4 had a camera crew. Travis sat in the front row. The same borrowed shirt, the same cousin beside him. But something was different in his posture. Tighter, watchful. He'd seen Megan come in, seen her sit on the opposite side of the room. His eyes hadn't left her since. Megan took the witness stand. Her hands shook as she raised them for the oath. Her voice cracked on the first words. But she kept going. She told him about the first dog she'd seen him hit, the texts he'd sent her, bragging about discipline, the night she'd found blood in the garage and the dog that was never seen again. She read the texts aloud. Her voice steadied as she went. Stupid mutt, finally shut up. Permanent like. New puppy's feisty. We'll see how long that lasts. The room was silent. Even the reporter had stopped writing. Larry Murdoch stood. This woman is a scorned ex-girlfriend with an obvious vendetta. I was scared. Megan's voice cut through his. Quiet, but clear. I was scared for 2 years, but I'm more scared of what he'll do to the next dog, or the next woman who tells him no. Dr. Coleman spoke next. She'd cross-referenced shelter records. Travis had surrendered 4 dogs in 3 years. Each showed signs of trauma. One had to be put down. The room was silent. Travis was on his feet. His chair clattered backward. She's lying. They're all lying. This is a bailiff. Harding's voice was ice. Remove Mr. Murdoch. 2 deputies moved forward. Travis struggled, shouted. As they dragged him toward the door, he twisted toward Margaret. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't. The door slammed shut. Harding looked at his papers, at the photographs, at Megan, still trembling on the witness stand. Then he looked at Margaret. I've seen enough. Commissioner Harding's ruling came the next morning. Hope was permanently remanded to Margaret Whitman's custody. Travis Murdoch faced criminal charges, 3 counts of animal cruelty, 1 count of contempt of court. The county attorney would pursue prosecution. No applause this time. Just quiet, people filing out, a few handshakes, nods from across the room. Frank Dawson stopped at Margaret's table, tipped his hat. Harold would have been proud. Margaret looked at the empty chair beside her, the one Harold would have filled. I know. Eleanor was waiting by the door. She didn't say anything, just took Margaret's arm and walked her to the car. The drive home was quiet. Fields of white on either side, sun breaking through clouds for the first time in weeks. Hope was waiting at the window when they pulled into the driveway. Tail wagging. Ears up. Margaret stood on the porch for a moment. Looked at the mailbox. The pink ghost of spray paint still visible beneath a fresh coat of white. Someone had painted over it while she was gone. The weeks passed. Winter loosened its grip. Snow melted into mud, then dried into hard-packed earth. People who had avoided Margaret now found reasons to stop by. A casserole left on the porch. Had extra, thought you might like it. Frank Bellamy from the hardware store, replacing the mailbox post. Noticed it was leaning. Don't worry about the cost. Helen Crawford at church, hand on Margaret's arm. I should have. I'm sorry I didn't. Margaret took her hand. You're here now. Megan Hollister moved to Bozeman. Fresh start. She texted Margaret sometimes. Photos of her new apartment. A cat she'd adopted from the shelter. Travis Murdoch pleaded guilty to avoid trial. 2 years suspended. 5 years probation. Permanent ban on animal ownership in Montana. It wasn't enough, it never was. But it was something. A morning in late March. First, crocuses pushing through the thawed ground. Margaret woke at 5. Habit now. Not Harold's anymore, hers. Hope lay at the foot of the bed, warm weight against Margaret's feet. The dog's eyes opened when Margaret stirred. Tail thumped twice against the quilt. Kitchen. Coffee maker. 1 mug on the counter. Margaret reached for the second mug. Stopped, looked at it for a long moment. She put it back in the cupboard. First time she'd done that. She carried her coffee to the living room, settled into the chair by the window. Her chair now. Hope lay at her feet. Stretched out, relaxed. No trembling, no watching the door. The grandfather clock chimed 6. The radio played softly a news station, one she'd found last week. Classical. Harold would have complained about it. She looked at his photograph on the mantel. Younger there, smiling. The fishing trip to Flathead Lake. 1985. I found something to take care of, Harry. Her voice was quiet in the morning stillness. Just like you always said I would. Hope's ear twitched at the sound. Margaret finished her coffee, stood. Her knees protested less than they used to. She opened the front door. The cold was softer now, spring in it. Hope bounded past her into the yard, ran a wide circle through the wet grass. Stopped, looked back. Ran another circle. Margaret watched from the porch. Coffee mug warm in her hands. The dog stopped again, stood in the middle of the yard, tail wagging, tongue out. Waiting for Margaret to come outside, Margaret thought about that night on County Road 7. The shape in the snow, the one step forward before the collapse, neither of them had known what came next. Both of them had chosen to try anyway. She set down her mug, pulled on Harold's old jacket from the hook by the door, stepped off the porch. Hope ran to meet her, circled her legs, pushed her nose into Margaret's palm. They walked together toward the back field. The sun was rising over the mountains. The snow was almost gone. Spring was coming. If you've stayed until now, you've carried something with you through this story. Something quiet. Maybe something familiar. The weight of it doesn't need a name. Many of us know what it feels like to sit in an empty house, to reach for a hand that isn't there anymore, to wonder if the best of our days have already passed. Some of us have stood at crossroads we never asked for, holding on to something small and trembling, unsure if we had enough left to give. That uncertainty doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. This story doesn't ask you to learn anything. It doesn't need to be understood or explained. Some things just are tender, unfinished, and true in ways that words can't quite hold. If something stirred in you while listening, let it rest there. You don't have to do anything with it. You're allowed to simply feel it, and then let it settle, like snow finding its place on the ground. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way through.